Kelli, you're going to...
You know, you don't have to spread way out in the back of the room. There is plenty of room around. You guys are as bad as the students in class, you know, where there's desks all up here.
Check, check, check. Hi, everyone. There are some handouts right behind that center raised area on the table. Thanks to Chalice for handing out the rest of them. Thank you very much.
The lights are bright. Yes, they are.
Check, check, check. We're ready to go. Check, check.
15 minutes for lunch.
Yeah, for my...
At least
for
you could grab
posterity.
something, right?
Thanks.
Check, check, check.
Ready?
Is my mic on? I think it's off now. Is it on now?
Yes.
Check, check. You hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So should we start?
Yes.
Are we recording?
This is neat.
Welcome, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay. We are going to be talking today in this session, this dialogue session, about online writing instruction and distance education with maybe a tiny smidge of MOOCs. We're not going to spend much time with that. This is, to my right, this is Kelli Cargile Cook. I am Beth Hewett, and this is Scott Warnock. We have a small plan for how we're going to go about this discussion. You have a handout that sort of breaks things down. We're going to talk for a few minutes about definition of terms because they're so important, and then we're going to return to definition of terms at the end of the session. We're going to spend a little bit more time together talking about access concerns, faculty roles, and assessment issues. And then, as I said, we'll return to definition. Throughout the whole session, we would like to include you and hear what you have to say. So basically, to make it orderly, what we can do is each of us will have a short thing that we want to talk about with these particular issues, and then we'll invite you to come to the microphone or pass the microphones around and say what you're thinking, ask any questions that you have, and we'll sort of keep things to maybe 20 minutes an issue so that we can move on through and end at 3 o'clock promptly. So thank you.
Shall we go?
We should go.
We are ready.
So I'm starting the first set of set of questions about definition. And we decided to start here because If you teach online, you may have experienced this. You walk into a faculty meeting or an administrative meeting and someone starts talking about distance education, and you listen for a little while and you realize, I don't know what they're talking about, because the way they do it or the way they're conceiving of distance education or online education is very different. So we thought that we would start off with just sort of a global discussion of how we consider distance education, online writing instruction, by talking about our experiences. In 1998-99, I decided to do my dissertation research in online education and technical communication. And so I took a correspondence course that the university was currently offering and moved it online and offered online office hours and online discussion time for my students. So I added some interactivity into that course and delivered the first service course in technical communication at Texas Tech that way, online. Since then, I worked for 9 years teaching asynchronously at Utah State University in their master's program, and piloted a few undergraduate connections. People who were on internships would take courses with us. And after leaving Utah State, I've been at Texas Tech for 6 years, where we have asynchronous class activities in our graduate classes. We have synchronous meetings weekly from an hour and a half to 3 hours, depending on the course and the time frame. And then I've also, in the last 2 years, been working with a hybrid setup where some of my students are face-to-face with me, some are online, and currently I'm going to be piloting a mega section of the introductory course that will include students coming in online as well as attending face-to-face. So I've had a lot of different kinds of online education experiences.
Thank you. And I think that's the same for me. I started working with hybrid courses. I piloted the hybrid networked communication classes at Catholic University in 1994 and graduated with a dissertation that looked at some of the ways that students talk to each other and how that was reflected in their revision. I worked at a community college in Baltimore and developed an online writing center for them, and then moved to Smart Thinking and developed their online writing program. Years later, I was hired by Pearson to redevelop the Tutor Vista online writing program before they acquired Smart Thinking and put the two pieces together. I've worked for University of Maryland, University College in a fully online setting, all asynchronous. And I have worked for 8 years now on the online writing instruction committee that the 4Cs hosts, looking at effective practices in OWI.
Thanks. And I'm the co-chair of the 4Cs OWI Committee for Effective Practices in Online Writing Instruction. And about 10 years ago when I started at Drexel, we were institutionally mandated, it was top down, to put our first year writing courses online. And that resulted, it was good for me because I got a job out of it, but it was a lot of pressure on the department. There wasn't a lot of expertise in this area. And what we ended up really doing, we still offer fully online first year writing courses. In fact, I just submitted my grades this morning for the winter course I taught. We're on the quarter system. But we're very much a hybrid structure now. We have about 100 of our 150 courses each term are hybrid. And I think that, this question of definition, just this really brief run through here, you can hear the range of different experiences. And Beth and I have been talking a lot lately about like the term online writing instruction itself. What that really means. Is this more of an administratively valuable term than it is pedagogically? Because who in here doesn't use a computer to teach their students to compose? We've been talking about how you can't go to the pencil writing session at C's. There is no track for that anymore. So digital technologies are so interwoven. So when we talk about online, like where is the line for that? And I think that was one of the questions we were hoping you had some thoughts about, maybe questions yourself, because there's a whole variety of other terms here that we're wondering if this is all in play now, this idea of using digital technologies to compose it. This should just kind of blend into what composition is now in a way that makes it more transparent, maybe?
maybe more transparent. It's starting to seem to us that online writing instruction is really just writing instruction, and that the instruction uses digital technologies, and that students, by and large, use digital technologies to do their writing. So we've been playing with the idea that online writing instruction is a term that needs to perhaps go away or be defined a little bit more explicitly in administrative terms. And by that we mean looking at such things as, is the course hybrid or is it fully online? Even a traditional course has some hybrid features, we think. And administratively that matters for seat time and where people will be placed and how students will come to expect the learning to happen. And then a fully online, we have to think about very specifically whether this is a synchronous or an asynchronous course, because synchronicity implies that there will be a specific time that students will meet with teachers, whereas asynchronicity implies that there's an anytime, anywhere kind of education going on. And so again, that has administrative types of values that need to be addressed.
So I think you can see that our experience sort of illustrates the variety of online delivery methods that are possible. We're wondering what is going on at your institutions and why you're here. What kind of online teaching are you doing? Step to the mic, please.
I'd like to add a particular addition to what you are also considering in terms of for-profit universities versus state universities. And I think that it makes a lot of difference in terms of how they are federally funded, and therefore if they get any federal funds, how indeed does the federal government have an impact or play with what is taught and how it's taught, as well you probably know. And also in the for-profit, they may not receive federal funds, but they then may alternatively teach the students or treat the students as clients. And the teachers are then salespeople who are the first line of battle, and you have to sell the whatever it is, writing or literature, whatever it is. Consequently, if you don't sell it well, then you're a poor salesperson, you're a poor instructress. And this is something I just wanted to add to the whole stratosphere of what you're talking about.
Are you in the for-profit area?
Yes.
Are your semesters like 7 weeks or?
I teach at several institutions, and one institution is 16 weeks, one regular session, and then another one is only 8 weeks, and the other one is 10 weeks. And it's quite unique to see how each institution decides to work with people.
That's an excellent point, and I think we would see a wide range of weeks of a semester and whatnot in a traditional institution as well. So there's no one definition for distance education where writing is involved. We'll come back to the issue of definition at the end with the hope that there will be more that you have to say about that. But let's talk about access issues for a few minutes here. And you have on your handout the principles and statements from 2 different position statements provided by the 4 C's. One is a statement of principles and example effective practices for online writing instruction, most recently published in 2013. And the other is the CCCC position statement on teaching, learning, and assessing writing in digital environments in 2004. And you'll note that the 2004 document, if you were to go back to it, is a bit dated. And it is in fact being looked at for revision and even possible retirement with something new coming out or being enveloped into ongoing position statements. So both of these statements have something to say about access. And I'd like to just spend a minute and talk about why the position statement for online writing instruction in 2013 has focused so much on access, making access its first principle and asking that every principle after that encompass issues regarding access. We found that composition at large doesn't deal enough with issues of access for a variety of students. And we're talking about students who have physical disabilities, for example, those who are profoundly sight or hearing impaired, those with quadriplegia, paraplegia, people with mild and temporary disabilities like a broken arm. We're talking about students with different learning challenges and learning differences, whether they might have audio processing disorders or writing or reading disorders and how that affects something that goes into online writing instruction. We're talking about cognitive impairment from the mild disease-related types of impairment to those with brain injuries. We're talking about multilingual speakers and the kinds of access issues that they have, especially when there is no separate course provided for multilingual speakers. And we're talking about students who are impoverished and who only meet class by getting to the public library or to the lab and have a limited amount of time allotted to them on the computer to do their work. And even those who may be impoverished in one sense but do all of their work on mobile technology because that's what they have. So when we're talking about access, we're talking about almost everybody, because I think at one time or another all of us also will have some of these issues. And we're talking about students and teachers needing access from both a legal state, from the ADA, but also from moral and ethical perspective. Our suggestion has been that we need to pre-fit, not retrofit, our courses with access and accessible types of materials and approaches to learning. And I think that those of us who have read about the recent lawsuits against MIT and Harvard would understand how scary it is to have done good work and put out excellent materials for students, especially for free, but to realize that because they don't comply with the ADA, we could be having some difficulties from that.
Yeah, you know, underlying this, the idea behind these dialogues was kind of examining some of these issues through these position statement documents and some of the statements within them. And, you know, a choice, as Beth said, that was made when we published our statement was to have access as front and center. It was interesting, there was some serendipity there because there was a Bill of Rights for online learners that was published around the same time, and access was first there. And you know, it's interesting because in online learning you think about that it opens things up more. But you know, we're not just talking about digital facilitation of learning. And so there's also, as Beth said, all kinds of ways of thinking about the people in your class in pedagogical ways. You know, how can they interact with your course? You know, I run a very text-heavy asynchronous course, and I have to say that Blackboard has taken some criticism for its ability to, you know, work with students who are sight impaired. And you think about, well, how would my course fit into this? And then if this is a programmatic, you know, courses are taught programmatically similarly, there's nowhere for students to go to learn in a way that fits them. So this idea of access really was more than, it wasn't just, it kind of goes back to definition in a way, because it isn't linked in necessarily with online writing instruction. It's a kind of philosophy of education. You know, how do I make sure that students can get to what I'm doing and what we're trying to accomplish in the course? And, you know, people I'm sure have narratives of access issues in their own institutions, and I think that, you know, the idea of these position statements, which we've been thinking about a lot a couple years out from publishing the one that we worked on, was, can a statement like this have enough clout, if you will, to help you do the things locally that you need to do, whether it's programmatically or in your own class, you know, i.e. making arguments with your administrative, the folks in your administration, your IRT departments, things like that.
And I think looking at this, the difference between the two statements, the 04 and the 13, the definition of access has really changed in a lot of ways, because we were thinking, I think in the aughts, about access to the technology. And so the digital divide appears in there. And And we're still talking about access to the technology, but in a much more complex way. Even our understanding of the laws around the ADA are really changing because, you know, initially when ADA came out, the idea was that students would identify and request accommodation, and we met individually with those students to provide them with the accommodation they needed. This new way of thinking about access is that every classroom is accessible to whoever walks in and must be accessible when they walk in. And so at my institution, that's changed our way of thinking. For example, we ran a Moodle server for years. And 2 years ago, the administration came to us and said, we need for you to shut down your Moodle site because Moodle is not accessible to all students. And we're running Blackboard and you're going to move to Blackboard. And so we had to shift everything, multiple sections, to Blackboard to satisfy our administrators, but also, it's a really hard thing to talk about because I say to satisfy them, but also because it's the right thing to do so that students have access, right? So there was a tension there. And then almost as soon as we moved into Blackboard last fall, the captioning question came out. And so I went to I have somewhere between 18 and 24 instructors that I supervise, and I had to go to them and say, look, if you're using YouTube, you have to check to make sure that it's captioned. Any video you have is captioned, and captioned well, before students come into the class that may need that. And just Friday, this last week, the administration sent a memo to the entire campus that said no videos at all without captioning. So we are under a mandate now to either remove videos from the class or to either caption them ourselves or to make sure that they are appropriately captioned. And we have to give the institution at least 6 to 8 weeks notice before we use captions, before we show video, to give them time to caption for us. So this is the new reality for us, and we're learning to caption. That's where we're at. And so this is a good thing, but just as there have always been sort of technology hitches that we have to get over as we learn to teach online, this is the new challenge that we need to face and meet in order to teach all students that want to come to our classes.
And it's an essential challenge, whether we like it or not. It's costly, time-wise and whatnot, but it's important to recognize, I think, that all students have different learning styles, and that the things that we do to make our courses accessible will improve learning for different students at different times. And so it's not just a matter of meeting the letter of the ADA, but rather the spirit of generosity that I think that we can hold for all students as we try to teach them a challenging and essential skill, which is writing.
Yeah, you know, and it's not, you know, again, this isn't technologically centered always, but for our purpose, of course, technology giveth and technology taketh away. Like, I do think that, you know, we're thinking about these massive, I don't like to think of them as open online courses. We like to think of them as since MOOC is such a terrible term, let's call it a MOOE, a massive open online educational experience, okay? But these are courses, I mean, I think you could certainly, I said courses, I'm sorry, educational experiences. You could easily see how they open up a lot of opportunity for students. I mean, anybody who's done, I mean, I'm sure many of you are here because you teach online and you have your anecdotes about having provided access to a student who may not have been able to take your course. 2 years ago, I had a student taking care of a cancer-ridden parent, and he was nowhere near Drexel, but he was able to take a course in the winter because of that. 10 years ago, I offered one of the Sloan C pro bono courses for Hurricane Katrina victims, and had a student who never would have been able to take any kind of course, was able to, had electricity, had access to the internet. So we have those kind of anecdotes, but in opening up this kind of availability, I think the tricky question for us has been, like, what else is being closed off and how are we thinking of it? Because Beth, your comment, which you've said many times to me about the spirit of generosity, it's not just a translation of do I have the proper technology tools, but am I thinking about opening it up to students in a way that makes this what we truly mean by access.
Right. The one thing we haven't mentioned is universal design, which goes hand in hand with this. And so I would just recommend a resource to you. I believe it's the University of Montana has a fantastic accessibility website that includes instruction in universal design. And if you haven't visited that website, I would recommend that you go there as a beginning point to think about how to make your online classes available and accessible to everyone.
And to complicate that point, let me say that there's a new book out, Foundational Practices of Online Writing Instruction, which is available to you as a free download through the WAC Clearinghouse and Parlor Press. I think you have a handout for that. There's a chapter in there by Sushil Oswal where he talks a bit about how universal design falls down. We have so far to go with this. So those of you who are graduate students and looking for a dissertation subject, there's lots and lots of rich material here. Do you have any thoughts you'd like to share at this point about access and access issues before we move on, please?
It seemed like, well, you mentioned a number of people who are producing the courseware, right? The course software, right? And there's also a lot of partnerships and contracts between administration and these groups. What do you see about this going forward? Because if we have pretty established platforms, and actually we have very few of them to choose from, is there a possibility for us as an organization, the 4Cs, to basically spur the development of platforms that are accessible? Because these are technologically solvable issues. A lot of them have to do with business decisions. Why they end up failing ends up having to do more with business decisions or business models than it does with actually whether or not they can be solved technologically. And I think we're kind of showing today that there's already people who are interested in having some different options, or kind of need to have those different options if we're going to continue thinking about writing instruction / online writing instruction, which is now the same thing.
Good question. I think that the community of 4Cs can have a lot to say about that, and I thought I'd speak a little bit to that later on, but when we talk about assessment, but I absolutely think so. And these position statements should help us. I mean, they help to outline some of the core values that we hold that we should be able to use moving forward in connection with or partnership with corporations that are helping to put together or creating these learning management systems, for example.
I was there this morning at, as many of you were, listening to Adam Banks' chair's address, and that this call for, there's a lot of the addresses have calls to action, and there's this we will do, this kind of thing, and I've become interested a lot lately in, because we spent so much time and effort, frankly, on this position statement that we worked on, and kind of stepping back from it, we were like, can this work on campus? Can people use it in ways you're sitting there, if you had this document, would it help you do certain things? But we have another question.
I was just going to raise the issue. I teach at a small community college in North Carolina, and we've just been talking about accessibility in our online courses, and we had some speakers come in and share with us. And I have to say, when we left, there was this sense of fear that there's so much to do. Everyone embraces the idea, but there's so much to do, and we teach a 6/6 course load.
Wow.
And we all wonder, when will there be time to develop these courses in the way they should be developed? And we're fearful that what will happen is we'll be stripped of our individuality as instructors. We'll have a set online course that will have to be taught because it's accessible. And where does that put us? How much does that set us back in our pedagogical lives, I guess? We're afraid we're going to become a cookie cutter system because there's no time for us to develop our courses appropriately.
and you're already stretched thin and overwhelmed and being asked now to learn new skills and another way of thinking about teaching, it's an immense issue. That's why it's an issue. It's not solved.
It is, and I think that lends itself to, really thinking about people doing increasing amounts of research into this area, because I think it goes back to, Beth, what you were saying about, if you have your courses, if they're retrofit based on things you react to, then probably there's going to be these kind of like doctrines that come down, right? Like, well, we can't do this anymore. We have to do it all this way. And I think that, it's interesting. The number, it was 6.6, by the way. That was the course load, in case you missed that. And, it's interesting, like, if you're going to get your teaching cohort together to, pre-fit courses, as you said, like, then you can be creative and think about, like, not losing your teaching identity. And I do wonder, we have a panel coming up next for the OWI committee, and one of the people on our panel is going to talk about course adjunct shells. That's her particular, contingent faculty. And for those of you who do contingent teaching know, like, a lot of times you are given a pretty rigid formula for how to teach, because institutions are like, well, we can't really prepare you, so here it is. Not just the book, but like, here's what you do in week 1 and this kind of thing. And you can see Access fitting into that, where, okay, we hit this problem, so now we're going to have this like overarching doctrine that you're going to follow, and it's just going to continue to narrow teaching creativity.
Any other thoughts? Okay, if you
Comes
have
somebody-
okay,
somebody
good, great,
popping up.
wonderful.
To what extent are administrators responsible for providing the tools for instructors providing access, as opposed to just the instructors doing it? Say, for example, at my college, it's like it's all put on the instructor's head, and my feeling is, well, hey, we need help.
And that's also an excellent point. The 15 OWI principles are separated by what's the responsibility of the faculty and what's the responsibility of the institution. And indeed, the institution holds considerable responsibility for these types of things and making sure that the teachers are well prepared, and so that they're not in the situation that you're in, having to retrofit or remove entire histories of courses that are so valuable.
I think that it's an interesting bind. We found ourselves with those Moodle sections, and we were told if we chose not to change, that we would be personally responsible for any lawsuit brought against us because we weren't accessible. So of course we moved. What choice did we have? We are piloting captioning at the administrative level, and I think that, but we've already recognized that there's no way that 2 or 3 captioners in the Teaching Learning Professional Development Center can do all of this. So again, I don't know the answer to this. I just know that this is the mandate that we're receiving and that we're responding to the extent that we can. And I share your fear. I know how you feel. We are concerned too, and part of what I think our job is, if we are online educators, is to sort of find ourselves in those meetings where we can talk about what it's really like to be teaching in those situations. And again, we understand the need. And so far, our administration has had the attitude that anything that needs to be retrofitted can happen over time. New courses need to be designed with that more accessible universal design consideration. Right.
Yeah, she's pointing out that without summer support, to think about like when would you do it, and the number, you have 3 times the number of adjunct faculty as full-time faculty on your campus, right?
And 5 years to get it done. 5
years. Sounds like a long time until 4 years from now, when you're scrambling to take care of this. And yet, we're I think ethically responsible. And I think, given the heart of most writing teachers, we have a heart for taking care of our students. with this kind of generous thinking. And I think that can ground the groundswell of change that is necessary to happen.
We did have a vendor come in a few weeks ago who offered to put classes online for us with a completely accessible design for the small fee of $30,000 per course and $9,000 per year for 4 years to keep those updated. And I thought to myself, that's $70,000. If I had $70,000 for every section, we wouldn't be here, would we?
Yeah, holy cow.
You know, Beth, what you're saying, I think it's interesting, like having this conversation in this crowd. And we hate to overprivilege composition and writing teachers, but here we are. And, it's a good group. And I do think that the fundamental nature of writing instruction makes us particularly well equipped pedagogically, like philosophically, because dealing with writing, working with writing, teaching writing is such a collaborative, flexible thing naturally. So you're always kind of working with students, and it's infinitely adaptable, and it's like, I think that the question in the back, I think a lot of times teachers have just for so long bent over backward to do whatever they can for students. And in some ways it's interesting where online becomes prominent here, is because like that was all happening in a room somewhere, but the things that happen on your computer, they're very visible, in ways sometimes I think we lose sight of. You teach online, like any student can only just plop that computer right down on the provost's desk and say, there's my class, here's what's happening.
You didn't mean to scare us, right?
No.
No.
I didn't mean to.
Other comments?
So, yeah, go ahead, please. Can you step to the mic?
Instead of scaring, I think actually it's a protective device for us teachers, having suffered from that particular kind of malady because the student said, oh, they left me out, they didn't grade, all of the anecdotes that I could give you.
Yeah.
But then when I track through the computer responses and the email responses and the dates that they were submitted, I'm totally protected. If your instructor or instructress understands how indeed they need to respond to the student and that kind of thing, then it can serve as a great tool for protecting us legally.
And that is a beautiful segue into our next section, which is the faculty role in this environment. And when we talk about that, let's just keep access in mind and filter some of our thoughts through the issue of access. In your handout, you'll have that 3 OWI principles are particularly focused on the faculty role, and that there are some faculty and administrative roles that have been identified in the 2004 position statement on teaching, learning, and assessing writing in digital environments. So we're not going to read that to you, but just have some thoughts to share. Scott?
We obviously talking about access is a great, in general, as a segue into thinking about how faculty, the role of faculty, and nodding back a little bit to the issues of definition. When you think about when MOOCs started bursting, onto the scene a few years ago, and that has definitely cooled a little bit, but it really got some vigorous conversations about faculty roles going, didn't it? Because, it got people thinking, like, what is the role of teacher? I just went to a session 2 hours ago, and I'm really glad I went. This high-powered group from Ohio State that's been running these MOOCs and doing research into them, and there's a similar group at Duke and some other places. And, one of the questions that comes up is, teaching is in some ways very contained activity. You've got your students, they go to this room where you're in charge, and the faculty roles here have become less clear in some ways. And if we, so then a lot of our work on the position statement was how do we support faculty roles, and how do we define what faculty are doing as teachers of OWI teachers, and how do you try to protect faculty through, again, this underlying theme here of, the institutional heft of position statements and language to guard faculty against abusive practices, to try to ensure that our community believes that faculty need certain things, down to course caps, which, by the way, the course caps were the literal number. I forget the position statement that was recently, some of you may know this, the number was removed, and I think it was changed to reasonable size. Some of you are nodding.
Yeah.
And there was, we had a conversation with the executive committee of Cs, as did some other committees, and asked for the numbers to be put back in there, because reasonable size, can be unreasonably interpreted, how shall we say?
So part of the faculty role is actually to be prepared well for the online setting. And I know that that sort of goes into administrative issues, but for teachers to teach writing online, and this is kind of one of my hobby horses, I think that they need to be strong teachers of writing, able to teach in online settings, and then strong online writing teachers. And all three of those are different. Strong teachers of writing, able to teach in online settings, and then strong online writing teachers, which pulls it all together. And to do that, we really have to appropriately prepare and support and compensate teachers. And that has to do with having reasonable course sizes. It has to do with providing some kind of compensation for professional development activities. It also means recognizing the difference. Someone said this, I think she's in the audience, someone said this in a workshop yesterday, that there's a difference between the technical training that happens to be able to work online and the professional or pedagogical development that is necessary to teach writing online, a very specific type of skill sets.
I think a lot about the preparation of teachers online. I teach a course every other summer for graduate students in our program, and a lot of that instruction is, well, we read your books and talk about them, you know, the ideas in them, but we're also, the other part of this is also modeling. So I think it's important for people to actually see good teaching online before they go into that environment. And I don't think that happens very much. I think people kind of dive in there and suddenly go, wow, this is not working. I have a graduate instructor who's teaching online for the first time, and I've gotten emails from students saying, I'm having trouble following along with the assignments. You know, she gives us an assignment, and then when I want to go back and look at it, I have to go to a PowerPoint and search for the slide. And we had talked about developing, you know, good scaffolded assignment descriptions, for example. But until you've got students in there, you know, usability testing your assignment, you don't really know where those holes are. And as compared to a face-to-face class where the students can just ask you questions, they're not available, or you're not available at that time. And so it's just some of the simplest things that are very challenging at first that we don't necessarily talk about enough and demonstrate. And sometimes you just have to be in the trenches to figure some of these things out. Assignment descriptions are one thing. Another thing that I had modeled for her, I believe in having, and I think you talk about this too, Scott, a place on the website where all questions go about assignments and about, you know, how does the website run. Anything that other students will figure out should be available to everyone, and you should only have to answer it once. My graduate student was getting 20 or 30 emails a day, I think, or at least she felt like it was that many, because students were emailing questions directly to her, and no one was getting the benefit of those answers, so she was answering it 4 times maybe. So, I mean, these are very simple things that experienced online teachers can share with inexperienced. And classroom preparation is one thing, but I think that ongoing mentoring is also an important part of that.
Can I ask a question of our group? How many of you out there teach online, want to teach online, or know you're going to teach online? How many of you have ever taken an online course?
That's a good number.
That's more than I thought, and you're ruining my point with this. Because I ask this question locally a lot, and almost no one has. And Kelli, your point is such a great point because, you know, let's face it, most college teachers they're not trained. We're lucky in composition, but you don't get trained, right? You're not pedagogically trained. You get a PhD and you teach. And at least you remember sitting in a room for the past 20 years with somebody, so you're like, I could kind of do it like that. But online, some people have no idea what that experience is like. Like what, we get the question all the time, what is the class? Like you go through a full day training and then at the end somebody says, you know, any questions? And you're feeling pretty good about yourself and they say, so what's the class? And it's because you've never had that experience. Like we don't have any model for what that looks like. So we have a question.
Hi. I had a question about, and maybe other people can talk about this experience about assessment of faculty. And there are 3 issues that I've run across at various institutions. The first is that course evaluations will be geared for face-to-face classes, and they'll just dump them into online classes. And so we've actually had online assessments, student evaluations that ask about room temperature, about how well faculty projects their voice in the room, and we're evaluated. And I mean, that's kind of an issue. And the second one is, you talk about mentoring and partnership, and if you teach a face-to-face class and you have a mentor and they come and work with you, or someone comes and evaluates your face-to-face class, they come in one time, generally, and they watch you teach one assignment, and they maybe see one set of graded essays, maybe. When they walk into your online class, they can see your entire course and assess and evaluate that. And that's a little bit risky, and it kind of goes into that third area. For those of you who teach online or get assessed online, how open can we be as faculty in kind of this tenuous environment to those kinds of partnerships with other faculty, where it's a real risk to open up online teaching, especially for those of us who haven't been online students, or it takes kind of that trial and error. Is there a way we can be open with other faculty and with mentors and partners? Because it is, to me, it's a much larger risk to open my online course to a colleague than it would be for my colleague to come into one class session and watch me teach one day out of a 16-week term.
I talk about the face-to-face class being ephemeral, because what's said here is spoken and then it's gone. But the online class is archival and everything is there. And some of us even do recordings of synchronous classes so that those are also archived in that space. So you're right, someone could come in and pretty much see everything that's happened in that course over the course of a semester. I think it has to be your comfort level on how comfortable you are. I have a pretty much an open door policy and invite people in. But I've been doing this a really long time. I don't know about what you do.
I feel comfortable with that level of transparency, because when someone is observing or either while I'm teaching or after I'm teaching, then I have a stronger metacognitive reflex, and I really work in different ways to think about how others might view what I'm doing. So I have found a way to take a scary thing and turn it into something that could be a strength that I can live with.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting points you raised there. And again, a lot of this stuff, by the way, I think it's about teaching. You know, we're talking OWI, distance learning, but these are teaching issues. And by the way, Heidi, we have in our peer-to-peer evaluations, we have the instructor was appropriately dressed. So we had that question. So distance learning, I guess you're from the chest up, you're like, I had no pants on, but I was teaching appropriately, I have a tie. So, I think that the question of observation, I'm actually curious what people think of that. Is this opportunities in certain ways? It is unnerving because, we have a writing intensive course initiative at Drexel, and we have a committee that reviews those courses, and I'm constantly reminding the committee, like we look at syllabi, a proposal, assignments. I mean, it's a pretty rich group of text, but I'm like, this is not the course. And if you got really responsible peer review from a colleague, they would come in twice, right? And normally it's announced, so you're like on your best behavior. Again, you throw on your tie that day. And it's like, that's not really the course. But online, all of a sudden, like, you can have the course. Mm-hmm. And I guess I am curious, people maybe who do this kind of work, does this open up a great opportunity? Because I can really look at you as a teacher. I can see your affect all the way through.
Please.
Can I comment on that? There are two really interesting points. The points about having peers come in and observe you. This is something I've done numerous times at our institution. I'm at Suffolk County Community College on Long Island. And I do have faculty come in and audit me because, to go to your point, we may not, I was thinking about what Scott said about taking an online class. When you teach a 6-6 load, I'm at a community college, so we have a 5-5 load, most of our faculty. They don't have time to take an online class. So what we do is, those of us who are like, I'm a tenured full professor now, I've been teaching for a decade online, I feel very comfortable. I run our campus professional development center, and we do something called the faculty fishbowl, where a faculty member sits and everybody gets to watch, and I'm usually the first person to jump in there because I come from a position, right, as a union officer, I represent our adjunct faculty, so I come from a position where I'm very mindful of my privilege and of, the position I am fortunate enough to hold right now. But when adjunct faculty, when non-tenured faculty don't have time to go do that because they're so burdened, when they can observe my class, it's more like auditing a class, right? So they don't have to do the homework, they don't have to participate, but they get an access enough throughout the entire semester to sort of see what's shaking down and how I respond to students. Like, there's 7 different ways to assign an essay. How do I assign an essay? Like, that kind of stuff I think is invaluable to colleagues. And I think it's incumbent on those of us who are in more privileged positions to make our courses available to people like that. And there was a question about observations. I happen to come from a very strongly unionized environment. And the way our observations are structured, we paralleled our online observations to the on-campus experience as much as possible. So the chairs, the academic chairs, can come into the class. You have a face-to-face, you sit down next to your academic chair, and you have a meeting with them, so you can point and click and show them what your class is about. And then they only have a 24-hour access period after that to go in, and only from a student role. So they would see in the online environment pretty much, it's similar, right? It's very parallel to what they would see in the on-campus environment, but it's enough. It's enough for the chairs to see what they need to see and to observe. And then voluntarily you can do a post, that 24-hour period, you could have a post meeting with your chair again. And I think that's very valuable for faculty to be able to sit next to their chair and answer the questions that they might need answered. But the chairs only have that student view, which I think is the same thing they'd get on campus. Why should they have anything different online? Because we try to treat them as similarly as possible.
Interesting.
Thank you. Thank you.
Comment on what you said also. I actually prefer an evaluation online than face-to-face because they can then see the whole breadth of the course. And I often feel like when an evaluator comes in for one class, they really don't understand the context of anything that we're doing. So it makes me feel better for them to be able to see the entire course, see how I've built to a certain moment, and then how we reflect on that and bring it into future opportunities throughout the semester.
I'm a writing program administrator on a heavily online university. About 70% of our courses are online. And so I do have access to all the adjunct faculty's courses. And I can say more often than not, I'm actually using that access to help defend them whenever there have been complaints. But of course, that depends on me, right? And so this is again where our comp rent ethic is hoping to come out. But I'll kind of like tie this to some of the things we talked about earlier. We have an in-house developed learning management system, and there's this, in order to make the program administration efficient, there's this proclivity to actually give all these analytics about activity of both instructors and students. And a lot of the objections I try to voice are related to taking all those numbers out of context, especially if you realize that there are different ways, obviously different ways to structure different assignments. But I think these are some other issues that that are worthwhile thinking about in terms of how things like learning management systems do or do not actually record in a way that does give you a chance to actually to comment on your work. And actually this is where something like doing having a teaching portfolio be like a periodic teaching portfolio and be the basis for that evaluation can help people just go ahead and point to their work. And also if you actually give everybody the same numbers that the administrator is seeing, I think these are important things to try to reinforce and maybe things to work into the principal's statement.
Thank you.
So I just want to make there's two sort of general points I'd like to make. One is that I don't see in these statements the recognition of we've developed a gamification system, which is essentially a very disruptive technology in terms of what the model behind, what I see behind these kind of statements, which is really based on a face-to-face. So how do you get to 20 students in a class? It's really a face-to-face model is where you're coming from for that, right?
I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you. Could you say that again, please?
Yeah. So we've developed a gamification system, and it's essentially a disruptive technology that I think really, to have an appropriate class size is a different kind of model for figuring out what that is. And one of the reasons I say that is that gamification works better with more than 10 or 15 or 20 students. So the problem with putting numbers in a statement like this, or the effective grading effective practices statement, is that it doesn't allow for any kind of flexibility with these other kind of technologies. And the other point that occurs to me in reading, and contributing to this dialogue really, is that I think you need to, in order to come up with these statements, you need to pay attention to the context of the institution. And that involves things like pay rates for instructors. So at our institution, we pay $9,000 for a sessional to teach one course, which is, I take it, more than usual. Tuition rates. The value placed upon writing instruction by the general culture and also by the specific institution. And then the other thing that occurs to me is pedagogical tools for, in our case, gamification. In what ways do those tools affect the environment for that teaching? And so those are the two things that I think that I don't see enough of here, or the disruptive technology changes that interaction. As you said about MOOCs, what it means to teach in a MOOC is very, very different anyways than in a face-to-face course. Same with the gamification thing. So we've got 100 resources that are online for students that if someone goes in to teach that course, they don't develop any of that stuff, it's there. So they're not doing teaching development work, but they're taking their time and putting it using it in other ways, basically.
So that's a model we didn't even talk about at the beginning with definitions. Could you tell us a little more about how the game works?
So it's not a game per se, it's gamification,
Okay.
which means, so the last speaker was talking about learning analytics, but normally we don't share those with students. In gamification, you're going to give students the analytics back straight to them so that they can figure out what to do with that feedback. But what that means is, like, as an instructor, I've done nothing manually because it's all automatic. So I haven't invested any time in that. And then the other part of this that we've worked on is we might call social commenting. So instead of having the instructor be the person doing all of the commenting in the class, we've got paid peer tutors online doing some of that who are trained. Students in the class are giving comments, and then finally the instructors are giving comments. But there's like 3 layers, and so it's not the instructor doing it all. So that changes the labor, really, of the course. But how that feeds into class size is a different matter, I guess.
Where is this magical place? It sounds like you have a great teaching situation there.
We're at the University of Alberta, so in Alberta, Canada, so we're talking at 8 a.m. tomorrow about this in more detail if you want to know more about that. But
Thank you. Thank you. We want to move on to our last topic before just returning briefly to definition so that we have enough time, because we have about 20 minutes left. And this is about assessment and evaluation. And someone has already brought up issues about assessing teachers, and I think that we could talk about that all day long. And then there are also issues about assessing students. Particularly in the 2004 position statement, there was a great deal of concern about whether or not automated writing assessment would be used and the particular dangers of that. And I thought that I would speak just a minute to that. And the whole notion of automated writing evaluation software is pretty well taken up by some of the great thinkers in our field, such as Les Perlman, for example, and there will be some presentations here regarding that. But I think it's important to look forward, given the ubiquity of AWE, or automated writing assessment software. I think when we acknowledge the inability of AWE to approximate a human understanding of rhetorical content, context, audience, style, and that sort of thing, we should probably look to what it can do. And I think that its analytics can help us to identify and address key characteristics of contemporary student writing, which is something that we don't know a whole lot about. I mean, there's a whole lot of data sitting in a whole lot of computers, but we don't have much done, not much, about understanding what's going on there. There's a lot of conversation about AWE that suggests that this train that has left the station and is chugging along is a train that we ought to avoid, that we ought to stay well away from. But I fear that if we continue to stay well away from it, that the people who are driving the train are going to be driving a considerable amount of our education and our educational evaluations. And so I think that we can work with the train rather than avoiding it in two coordinated phases. One would be for some of us to hop on it and educate the computational mathematicians who develop the analytics about writing and what we need to learn about it. And I know there are some people who are doing that now. I also know from having talked with one of the presidents of one of the companies that runs the AWE software that they acknowledge that they don't know how to make the software approximate a human understanding of rhetoric and writing. I think that if we get on the train, some of us, we can have them write the algorithms that will allow us to read and categorize different qualities of student writing. And I'm saying qualities, not quality. I'm saying characteristics. We need to know, what does it look like? What are its traits in terms of rhetorical, thematic, and contextual, and content, and other qualities of paragraph, sentence, and phrase? What does it all look like? Because research will help us to teach better. And research is the 15th principle that we articulated for the OWI statement, that we just need to know more. And I suspect that writing has shifted from the earlier part of the 20th century to what we see now, because students are primarily are composing in an online setting, just like I am. I know my writing has shifted considerably. The second thing, besides hopping on that train, I think, would be to recognize that we can't derail a train like automated writing software, evaluation software, but I think we can re-rail it. Rather than derail, we can re-rail it. We can't stop it, but we can re-rail it and appropriate their tools to own our own educational purpose. I think we should remove the rails miles ahead of that train. So we need to get ahead of the train and relay the rails in the interests of composition. Put the algorithms to work for what they can do to improve student writing. And I'm not saying grading or placement or feedback that's not necessarily so good, but rather re-railing the train to give us the tools and the knowledge to form and take next steps that involve these analytics that can be helpful to us. So the last thing I just thought I would say is that re-railing the train can put us in a position of political strength to educational uses of this AWE that makes sense for us rather than as an assessment tool.
There's a lot bouncing around in here, and I think about this question of assessment and evaluation. In some ways, I don't know where your institution is with assessment, but it can be a frustrating conversation, and especially some of the folks who are running assessment in different places. And I think about this idea of ultimately looking at writing, what is it? So we had this comment this morning by Adam Banks about the essay becoming genre emeritus, But this idea of when you're doing assessment and evaluation, you're trying to say what the thing is. And your comment about a gamified course like that, I'm really thinking about a position statement. Any kind of statement is you're trying to gather everything into a definition, and you raise a very good point about how things go outside that. In fact, with MOOCs, I signed up for one of the early MOOCs, the writing MOOCs, I was one of the 80 to 95% of people who did not complete. But in fairness, I wasn't there to complete. I was there to sign up to see what it was like. And I was disappointed in what I thought was the lack of innovation in the pedagogy. Like I thought, wow, this is going to be like something, whether it's technologically facilitated or even the assignment kind of mentality. But it really wasn't. It was just a lot of students, a lot of peer review driven, like things that looked familiar but at scale. And I think that these questions of assessment and evaluation, like kind of like we have something that we think we know what it is, and that's what we base it on, you know? And redirecting this, like I love that train metaphor of this, especially for the automated software, because that was, you know, Rich Haswell has one of my favorite quotes where he talks about the automated graders and said, you know, composition kind of looked away from it, and then everybody else said, we're going to use this, and then we weren't in the conversation. So this call that Beth is making to get involved in the conversation and not say, well, we're not going to deal with that, because with this growth in like the massification mindset, whether it's MOOCs or something else, people are going to do this kind of thing. And they're going to say like, well, let's get that essay that we can nail down and call it something so we can evaluate it.
I'm not sure what to think about it.
Neither am I, but it didn't stop me.
I know. You know, I'm having trouble moving towards even grading within the LMS. I still want to download and use, you know, my review in Microsoft Word to assess writing. I still prefer Word to PDF grading, you know, the sticky notes up there. Well, you're making me think, Scott and Beth.
It's hard stuff.
It is. It's really hard stuff, and I'm not sure I want to let go of that. I may be on the caboose, you know.
Well, just know that I'm not suggesting that we use AWE to assess the writing, but that we use it to research and understand what's happening in writing, so that we can pin down some of the traits, and we can say, oh, okay, I see some qualities here we need to boost, or that we want to continue to teach because it's working.
Yeah, I wonder if anyone out there is using analytics in any way that you could sort of enlighten us in terms of how it's working.
I don't know if analytics is what I use or not, but I'm kind of short, so. I'm Wendy Austin, and I work at Southern New Hampshire University. I missed the very beginning of this, so I don't know whether, you know, you said anything about Paul LeBlanc. He is in a Department of Education position right now, which is why he had to cancel. So that was kind of interesting. I was kind of hoping to talk to him a little bit, but I tell you, I have had a very unusual experience working for SNHU recently, and I keep on feeling like I'm a person with a flashlight in a dark tunnel. Now, this sounds very negative, but it isn't meant to be, where I don't know very far what's going on in the future, and if necessary, I'll bail if none of it meets with my pedagogical standards. But so far, I've been really impressed with the system that they use for teaching writing online. So I'm teaching an online a Composition 2 research writing course, and I've actually been teaching for 26 years, and I actually came from an unusual situation where I was a tenured professor, associate professor, making enough money at a place that I had a lot of control over what I could use in my online course, and I taught early on with computers. And when everybody was starting, I was one of the first adopters, and I decided how I would organize my course and everything like that. Well, recent life situations changed, and I resigned from my position 3 years ago, and now I'm an adjunct. So it's really strange. But I really am impressed, because they have a situation where they have a 3-week intense adjunct training where they they're teaching the people who they've hired to be adjuncts. You know, there's a lot of adjuncts there. They do have full-time faculty in the face-to-face courses, but the faculty at the face-to-face level, they use the assistant dean and different, I think there's a couple assistant deans that always look into our course anytime, and it's actually very comforting, surprisingly. And in fact, I just called up my course just a few seconds ago, and I was checking things because every course, at least so far now that I'm teaching, and since I'm relatively new at this institution, they have, I don't know whether they have maybe, I don't know how many exactly, maybe 10 to 20 adjuncts that are over, like within a team lead. That's sort of like a supervisory position. It's really weird to be a longtime professor and then have a team lead all of a sudden, but it's really helpful because I can ask her questions and she keeps an eye on what's going on, and so does the assistant dean, and they go check in, and we use rubrics to very nicely organized and pedagogically sound rubrics to teach each phase of the course, you know, categories, and you know they're great. And we use 2 peer reviews, and you know it's very rigorous. So I'm really, I don't know exactly what to say about that. I actually had more to say when you had the question up there about the faculty issues, but because there's faculty who teach and deliver it, and we're active every day, and it's not like we just administer things, but they also have the back end of it is driven by subject matter experts, and apparently I think in about 3 weeks, I'm going to be working on a workshop where I'm a subject matter expert who is going to help design a linguistics course and some other courses. So what they do is they put their expertise to use in sort of designing the course so that it's pedagogically sound. So it sounds a little odd, you know, it's very compartmentalized, and that kind of goes against my grain a little bit, but I haven't yet had a problem with any of it. So, you know, the pay isn't as good as wherever he is, but that's not a big concern of mine. What is a concern is that I don't ever want to teach in a place where everything goes against the grain of my philosophies. So far, so good. And I had a wonderful first term, and I really enjoyed having sort of the sort of babysitting sort of approach, even though it's a little bit like that. But if you wanted to ask me anything more about that, I'd be glad to answer. So.
Thank you. What I was thinking just flew out of my head. Sorry. I know we have
30 seconds to get it back.
I have 30 seconds to get it back. I think we're going to be bringing this back around, you know, all of it pulling together with what is distance education and online writing instruction, and you know, how do we define these issues, and they're very complex, and things like the position statements that you have pieces of really try to pin down solutions or beliefs or values that will help when you're constructing your courses in your own institutional setting. They don't always match up, but that's the goal.
Want to go to this last slide?
Sure.
So we just have a few minutes left, and the more we talked about this, the more we realized that even when we're in face-to-face classes, we're teaching online writing in many ways. And the other thought that I have about this, especially listening to you and my own experience, is that I just want to say that all these years of teaching online, I think, have made me a better on-site teacher, and that there are real benefits to both kinds of instruction. For example, I think my students understand my expectations better in a face-to-face class now because I've made them clearer in my online classes because my students aren't there. I think my discussions are better because I organize them for my online classes, and now I bring that into my face-to-face classes. So they feed each other, I think, and there are many similarities, although there are always going to be challenge, I think, moving back and forth between the two mediums. But I think that's where I want to leave it as far as returning to a definition. I'm seeing a blurring of boundaries.
Yeah, I don't know that definition because we're at the end here, but something came out of this conversation to me was a lot of talk about transparency. Whether, Cynthia, was your discussion of faculty training, how we see student writing, how people see us. And, you know, sometimes synchronicity sucks, let's face it. I mean, there was a similarly themed session at this time, and you can't be in both places, and this isn't online, and it's 3 o'clock, so we have to take our physical selves to the next place. So thank you very much.
Thank you for coming.
Such a great audience. If you want to see we have a couple events for the Online Writing Instruction Committee, if you're interested, including a, excuse me, a panel right now. So if you're interested in more dialogue about what we're doing and online writing, please join us. Thanks to Joyce for putting this together. I think this was a lot of fun.
Thank you.